This evening, our subject is the Ascension as one magnificent pathway to the heart of God, and the Bodhisattva ideal of the Buddhists and members of the Far Eastern branches of the Brotherhood. I believe that clarification of these two pathways is sometimes important to those sincere students who want to know those little details that can have an impact upon goal fitting. Hence, we have chosen at inner levels to reveal some of these facets to you tonight, so that your edification and your choice of pathways may be made clear. Let us make clear then also that we prefer the path of the Ascension as the choicest goal for the student of the light. But remember, if we skim off all the cream from society, we will have a very thin, skimmed milk left. I want to then define for you, first in miniature, both pathways, and then explain the matter of choices and why some of the great masters have chosen to take the Bodhisattva pathway even though they were able to qualify for the Ascension. The first pathway leading to the Ascension is one of degrees, spiritually attained, and mastery of the self by the individual. This includes complete emotional and mental control. In order to attain and manifest mastery, we do not need to manifest mastery according to human terms and definements. Mastery is a divine achievement, and the accreditation of cosmic mastery comes before the Brotherhood and according to their tenets. It has nothing to do with human opinions of what a person is. And this is why many of you have met masters on the street, unascended beings, of course, but adepts and masters nonetheless, and have not known them, because they may even drink a bottle of 7-Up, and occasionally some of them have been known to smoke cigarettes. Yes, I said it. They don't approve of it, however, for anyone else. And they don't even approve of it for themselves. They just occasionally do these things in order to conceal themselves in the mass consciousness. However, in the main, you don't have to worry about that. Most of the adepts don't do these things at all. The reason why I mentioned it at all is because I want you to understand that human opinions of people do not necessarily prove anything. Manly Palmer Hall from Los Angeles tells an interesting anecdote concerning Saint Germain. He claims, I don't claim this, but he claims in this book, more or less, that Saint Germain sired a child after he was ascended. And he says that Saint Germain at that particular time, as was the fashion of the times, carried a silver snuff box. And that his son, the son that he sired, was slain in a duel and lay there covered with a cape. And that Saint Germain pulled back the cover of the cape and saw that it was his son, and then took a pinch of snuff up his nose and turned his head, and he says, "He was my son." His grief lasted long enough to take the pinch of snuff. This story is told in one of the books by Manly Palmer Hall. Now, whether or not it's true, and I have not either endorsed it or disendorsed it, the fact does remain that adepts and ascended beings of the Brotherhood, as well as unascended masters, do occasionally do a few things that are common to man I think primarily because they do not want to attract the full attention to themselves that they would otherwise attract. It's an interesting thing, and just a point in passing. This is not my theme. So don't be too quick to judge others. Don't decide that because somebody uses a word of slang or somebody does something that you wouldn't do, that they are immediately cast down in your mind from that pedestal that you have placed them on in ruins on the marble floor. Because we really cannot judge outwardly. And we ourselves ought not to judge ourselves outwardly. Instead of that, we ought to have a mounting aspiration toward the ascension. We ought to be lost in the clouds of glory surrounding goal-fittedness and not be trapped by the dying flowers along the pathway, the flowers of illusion that hold us more or less enamored with their jewel-like quality, and then they're fading. These are meaningless. What really counts is the process of overcoming, true adeptship, true mastership, true overcoming, true victory. So the ascension is our goal. And what is the ascension? The ascension, as we now understand it, is conferred upon an individual who has balanced 51% of his karma. That has been the decree now for quite some time. Human beings are not required to balance 100% of their karma from the human level. This has extended vast hope to large numbers of people. They don't have to be wholly perfect, just 51% perfect. But there's a catch in it. I'm going to tell you the catch. After you ascend, you have to balance the other 49% from inner levels. And then you find yourself trying to beckon to the poor man to get out of bed because he's got work to do, and you're a master, and you're standing over the poor corpse laying there, and you say to him, come on, we've got work to do. It's a certain hour in the day, get up. Doesn't hear you at all, completely oblivious of you. And you send other directions to him from your level. And you say, please, don't go that way. No, that's psychic over there, and that's spiritual over there. Come on over this way. And the guy keeps right on going that way. And the more you talk to him, the more he seems to ignore you. It's as though he decided that you were a mentor that was not actually truly spiritual, and he prefers to listen to the foolishness of his own mind. But you're ascended, and you have karma with this man. You've got to bring him into greater light. You're an ascended being. It's really fun from that level, too. Especially with human beings. You know how the masters have said, they say that we never can depend on human beings. These are the ascended masters, you see. They've been right down here with us. They've had all the temptations that we've faced, and they've overcome them. But they still have 49% of their karma to balance. Now, the question has been raised, does everybody ascend at 51% of their karma? No, they don't. Some people, by choice, when they reach that 51% level, they don't stop there. They stay on earth and serve humanity until they may have balanced 80% of their karma, or 90%. Then they pay the other 10% when they get upstairs. But this is a matter of choice. The election of the ascension is often actually given to the individual. They can either accept it and go up there and sort of escape from the world of form into their glorious eternal victory, but still they have to pay their debts. So they do, and they elect to pay it that way. There's something in the Bible about this. It says, now some men's sins are beforehand going to judgment. And it says, in some men they follow after. Isn't that an interesting point? But it happens to be true. Now, I want to tell you then that the ascension is a glorious attainment. And it is just the kind of description that you will find in the book by Dr. Ingram called Pillar of Fire, where she writes to her father. Her name is Adina, I believe. And she writes a description of the ascension. And the ascension also is to be found in the New Testament. And from the New Testament, we can gather some insight into it. The late Bishop Pike was very confused by the ascension. He, of course, adopted the intellectual examination of the process. And he said, what a silly trap this is. He said, when we ascend, he said, where do we go? Which way is up? And he said he couldn't see it. We have to understand that the earth is round. Christopher Columbus proved that. And we know it, of course, from other scientific factors today, spatial explorations, trips around the moon, etc. But when you stand over in China, your head is pointing one way on the terrestrial globe, and when you're standing over here, it's pointing another way. So somehow or other, Bishop Pike got his geometry mixed up. He didn't quite understand the process of the ascension. It is not a process of just disillusion of the elements of the body. In other words, it is not like a cremation. But what actually takes place is that the Spirit of the Father accepts the total being of the Son in this cloud that receives him out of human sight. And in effect, man is then found everywhere at the same time, just like God is. Heaven is the place within ourselves, in consciousness. It is not a physical place in space somewhere. It can be anywhere and probably is everywhere. So in effect, when Jesus went up on Bethany's hill and disappeared from physical view, he assumed the posture of spirit. And he became, if you can compare the universe to a sponge, he became like the water that is absorbed by the sponge. He was absorbed into the Godhead. He returned to the Father. Now, this is no desecration, by the way, in any sense, microcosmic or macrocosmic. Right now, you're a little sponge, maybe 5 or 6 feet high. And you have absorbed a spark of God's life in yourself. And when you came out of your mother's womb, you were a little bit of a shaver. And you grew. But that's all relative. And in effect, what happens is that in the process of the ascension, the being of man and his consciousness is absorbed by the Godhead, and he gets into a bigger sponge. So the body of all cosmos, in effect, becomes his. Master of cosmos, he is then possessed with the ability at will to transfer himself to any point in space or time, where he can appear at will to anyone he wishes to, as the Master ably demonstrated after his ascension. He came into locked doors, into closed rooms. He walked on the water. He prepared fish on the fire for them to eat. Even though he probably was somewhat of a vegetarian himself, he prepared fish for them, low in sodium content. Well, the general idea here is that an ascended being is not some sort of a God king in the sense of the world's Caesarian concepts. Like Julius Caesar, he doesn't just sit on a throne somewhere and order people around. Here we're dealing with a cosmic being. But now remember that this cosmic being in reality is a member of a great brotherhood. And please understand the fatherhood of God. God is the Spirit. The brotherhood is made up of other consciousnesses, but they're all one. Have you ever read with some degree of questioning and doubt in your mind this statement? Let us go down now and make man in our image and after our likeness. Don't you understand that the universe is very, very ancient? Don't you understand that in this ancient universe there have been outbreathings or manvantaras of God a long, long time ago from now, and that one of these days the present age will end? In other words, we have the outbreathing of God from the central sun for symbolic purposes, we will say. This is where the mouth of God perhaps takes a hold of the balloon of cosmos and begins to blow. And the breath of God going out expands and expands and expands through space. And eventually God fills everything with this creation, which is actually the Grund in the Ungrund. If you want to say it in the German, it's the created and the uncreated. And so we find space is expanding and can be proven scientifically to be expanding. This is, of course, the natural course of divine events or cosmic episodes. So space gets so big. We have the expansion and maturity of cosmos. And the idea is transcendence. Each age of God ideation is intended to be more transcendent than the last, because in effect God is maturing in His universe. I don't know whether you all understand this or not, but it is drawing upon the magnetic law of transcendence. Well, people, of course, get hung up on this sometimes because they say, well, if God is already perfect, how can He expand any more? They don't understand what perfection really is. You can have the qualities of perfection in a nutshell, but you can still fill the earth with them. And you can improve the qualities of the nut meat. You can improve the qualities of life from a spiritual standpoint. For heaven's sakes, qualitatively speaking, there's nothing wrong in God Himself expanding His own nature. Why? Because God is all of us and all of cosmos and then some put together. But we have some part in it because we've got a little bit of God imprisoned within us. That's the imprisoned lightning, the imprisoned splendor of the ages in ourselves. And God Himself fashioned this way of life. The only way that the divine lightning can strike in human affairs is by the permission of the human will. Therefore, every son of heaven that receives this fire, that leads him to the goal of his ascension, receives it the same way and is traveling the same road. And ultimately, he will become as masterful as God Himself. But he's going to find, when he gets a little higher in the divine peerage, that there are those who have been there before. How many of you have ever heard of Sri Magra? I doubt it. Yet I'll bet you your souls will leap just at the sound of the voice of his name, Sri Magra, a former Lord of the World from other ages. You ought to understand then that in this vast universe there are undiscovered ascended beings that are not necessarily made known to man. Why? Because spiritual and cosmic work is so diversified. We hope to be able to show you during this conference some slides of the Pleiades and various parts of the solar system taken through some of the giant telescopes of our land. And I want you to particularly examine those slides. Why, you see globules of light in the most amazing and harmonious manifestation that you ever could imagine. And you ask yourself, why? How little this world is in comparison. All these vast distances, all this tremendous sea of light. Is all of this without purpose? Is all of this without life? Of course not. Let us not be so ridiculous. If one drop of water can contain a sea for parameciums, and they can all be swimming in there with their little tails, do you think that this creative cosmos is just limited to this earth? Of course not. We have intelligent life throughout all of cosmos. And just because we come to one dead world, or the remnants of dead worlds like the planet Maldek, which now forms the asteroid belt in our own solar system, is no reason for us to discount the existence of life somewhere else in the universe. But it really wouldn't make any difference. Do you understand? Whether life were on other planets or other parts of the universe or just here. From the standpoint of us as people, our life is more or less important to us and should be. Why do I say this? Because there is a statement that goes like this: man, know thyself. This inscription written over the old temples is a manifestation from elder worlds of spiritual art. And the priesthood of Melchizedek is a very ancient priesthood. I doubt if most of the people in our world today would like to live according to those tenets. Which brings up a point. The priests of Melchizedek are never involved in any form of sexuality. And this is a very strange point, perhaps, to many people. Naturally, because they do not involve themselves in this, they can truly be called those who have no father and no mother. Because they are not involved in cycles of generation, but only in cycles of regeneration, that which never begins can never end. And how can living people suddenly become priests of Melchizedek? Well, it's possible because there are many mysteries that are not known to the general public. And we have no intention of discussing some of these mysteries other from just touching on them. But we are going to discuss with you the Bodhisattva ideal in contrast to the ascension as goal. As goal. The Bodhisattva ideal, of course, proclaims no penury of spirit, but proclaims attainment. In other words, it is necessary for a Bodhisattva to have something. So many times I meet people here who say to me, well, if I had $1 million, Mark, I tell you the Summit Lighthouse would really be rolling in the money. But I only have my old age pension, so I can just help a little bit. Well, it's easy to give away what you don't have. Things might change if people had that $1 million, and I'm comparing this to spiritual attainment just for a reason. In other words, a Bodhisattva is one who has overcome, who has attained mastership. I will make contact with a Bodhisattva here tonight, and those of you who are sensitive will be able to at least realize that there is such a thing as a Bodhisattva on the planet. In fact, there's many of them. I would just want to demonstrate this for a moment, if you'll permit me. Please relax, separate your hands and feet wherever you are. We don't need a lot of time. How many here felt that contact? Around 21 people. Well, obviously something was happening. Just because you might have been one who didn't feel it doesn't mean it didn't happen, and I didn't create it as an illusion. Nor was it a figment of these 21 people's imagination. If we had sustained it for a longer period of time, more people would have felt this particular contact. If only one person beside myself had felt it, It would have proven something. I was making contact with a very famous Himalayan adept who is a bodhisattva. I will not identify him for reasons of my own choosing. The point I want to make is that a bodhisattva does not choose to ascend. As a rule, they remain here, and by their vibrations, the force of their divine thought, they affect millions of the evolution of this planet benignly. They do work for the brotherhood at inner levels, and they identify themselves with the planet. A story told by an Indian yogi many years ago, familiar to some of you, concerning the bushy-tailed squirrel, will give you the concept, which I will make clear to you. He said a little squirrel with a bunch of baby squirrels came to the edge of an ocean. And there the little squirrel parked with her brood, when along came a big wave and swept all her little squirrels into the sea and drowned them. And the little squirrel got to shore some way or other, and she looked back at the ocean and she said, "Oh, naughty ocean." She said, "I will dip my tail in you, and I'm going to take all of the water out of you, and I'm going to dry you up until you give me back my babies." And she started, and she just kept running and going, swishing her tail in the ocean and then swishing the water on the dry land. She's going to dry up that great big ocean. Well, in effect, the bodhisattvas have been compared to this story, because regardless of what human beings do on this world, the bodhisattvas continue to maintain a high state of cosmic immutability in their physical bodies, and their physical bodies do not deteriorate but are charged with living light to such an extent that many of these beings, and there are several in the Himalayas, dwell there in caves. And don't think, by the way, that you're going to go over there and discover them, because they are not that readily available, as we very well know. Although we were not far from Kulu, by the way, and the Chogyal of Sikkim invited both my wife and our party to come over to Sikkim, to Gangtok, I think was the name of that city. But the Indian border guards would not allow us to cross because of the danger of war and praying Chinese from China. We were on the border of China, you see. And before we could actually negotiate with the Chogyal by telephone, our schedule prevented us from further staying in Darjeeling. But that is a part of the area where many of the great masters live. It is not far from Kichinjunga or Karchinjunga. The great masters live there in caves, and I'm not referring to yogic masters in the ordinary sense of human yoga achievement. I'm referring to the masters who have attained the bodhisattva ideal. I do not recommend the bodhisattva ideal for people. I feel that if there is such a compulsion in human beings placed there by God, then that compulsion will act in their own world, and these may refuse the ascension even when they have the privilege of accepting it, because they have some desire, like the bushy-tailed squirrel. They want to remain on this planet until every living human being on this planet has finally attained his ascension, and then they'll go. They're willing to go at that time, but they don't like the idea of taking heaven by storm, or taking heaven, period, and allowing this earth to become the abode of vampires and everything else, or vultures. In other words, they don't like human vultures, and they don't like all the things that are going on in the world today with people preying on each other and causing all these problems. So they insist, if they can't have control over the earth, they're going to have control of themselves. And these bodhisattvas are a great assistance to the hierarchy as far as maintaining a vibrational contact upon the planetary body that is very stabilizing to the planet. I think sometimes that the earth would probably split in two if it were not for the pure and holy Christ-like vibrations of the bodhisattvas. Let us not then discount all of these beings and say that all we are interested in are the ascended masters. And by the way, I received this from the Ascended Masters. So it is with their sanction and authority, because they consider these brothers equally important to the evolution of the planet. However, I think that the Bodhisattva ideal should not become the goal of the average person in the Western world. And I think that few in the Eastern world should follow it either. I think we should try to obtain our ascension. I think this is the real goal of humanity, and the one we should prefer. I simply like to have you, as the hierarchy likes to have you, cognizant of this segment of world society. These ascended beings are great, but these bodhisattvas are also very great beings. Now, please don't confuse the bodhisattva with some guy that wears a turban over in India and tells you he's a great yogic master. One of them came to New York and he was found with a blonde in a bathtub, practicing Tantra yoga. This happens to be true, and he was arrested by the New York police for that very reason. And if some of you don't believe it, you can see the records of various police departments and investigate this for yourself, and you'll find that I'm telling you the absolute God's honest truth. There is no room for hanky-panky in the Great White Brotherhood. If a person even starts in their earliest novitiate in the Brotherhood and then begins to get engaged in all of this tantric yoga, this sort of sex yoga, and all of that junk, they can anticipate speedy and swift expulsion from the Brotherhood, and the sign of excommunication will be given to them quickly. Please understand this. The Brotherhood is pure, and the Brotherhood is divine, and the Brotherhood is concerned with the Christ-like virtues that ought to exist in the mind and spirit of everyone upon the planetary body. It would be nice if we could chase all the blackguards of the world off the planet. But of course, you can't do that. There are fakirs in every line of endeavor. You have men today that are not printers, and they go out and they tell people that they're printers and that they're union printers and everything else. I know of one man that forged his papers in the union and was kicked out of one plant after another all over Ohio and West Virginia, until finally he decided to quit working as a printer. We have people who have forged their doctor's credentials and worked in hospitals and performed major operations upon people for as long as 5 and 10 years and never saw one single day of medical school. Did you know that? This is a matter of record. We have fakirs in almost, as I said, every human endeavor. And there are spiritual fakers in the Orient and in the Occident. Your heart must become a scale of balance, because these people invariably trap themselves. You should realize this. I want you people to know this. They will trap themselves, but it isn't always readily apparent to the uninitiated. Sometimes a lot of people are fooled. Some pretty fine people are fooled. And I think there's nothing worse than probably being fooled. So you should understand that the public today is very gullible and very ignorant. And there is a great deal of ignorance among the general masses of the people about true spiritual manifestations and about the Great White Brotherhood. We have a lot of misunderstanding about the total situation I'm talking about. The Great White Brotherhood, the Bodhisattva ideals, the Ascension, all of this becomes very confusing to the average person. They're brought up on Darjeeling tea and coffee from South America, and pancakes made from white flour and lots of honey and sugar on top of them, and moving picture shows and television now, and the reading, writing, and arithmetic the school teaches, and that they're going to get married someday and probably have children, and that then eventually they'll die and have to pick out a tombstone. And this is just a sort of an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and finally you come to the end. It's a matter of eschatology. You finally reach the point where the whole thing ends. In reality, it doesn't end at all. If it does, it never begun. It's the old riddle of the serpent swallowing his own tail. So we have to understand these differences in our own mind and get a fixation on what we're talking about. We are not products of just our environment. We also have a heredity. And the heredity factors are very strong, and this is what makes the great distinction in people's abilities. A mind that is never used to thinking cannot possibly be the same as a mind that is trained to think. I'll bet you in this room and in the next room here, we have some people who don't even know what a syllogism is. Are you afraid to admit it? Put your hand up if you don't know what a syllogism is. Let's see how many people. Well, all right, there you are, right there. So you see, the very reasoning processes that are taught in ordinary courses in philosophy are not readily apparent to you because you're a segment of the masses. Do you know what deductive reasoning is? Well, that's a syllogism. Syllogistic reasoning. Well, you see, human reasoning is not even understood by the masses of people. And so there's an awful lot that we have to learn about our own sciences. Is it not then natural that, seeing that the schools do not teach the ascended master laws, and that most of the people who get up to teach them don't even know which way is up, isn't it quite natural that you wouldn't really get the truth in a lot of cases? You get a lot of garbage. And you know, I consider that Sanskrit garbage is one of the worst of all. Have you ever noticed in some of these books that come out of India where they talk about, well, as I talked about the Atma, that, for example, they'll talk about the Atma to some guy down in Arkansas. Actually, there's a lot of wonderful people down there, you know, but I mean, a lot of other people don't know it in other parts of the country. I happen to like those people pretty well. But nevertheless, I mean, for example, they read down there in Arkansas in the Baptist church, they read about Atma. What in the world's an Atma, they say. And they go a little further, and they talk about karma, and they get into all these words that are in these books. And these poor people, they just don't understand that theology, because most of the writers don't even have a glossary, and if the glossary is there, you need a couple of dictionaries to figure out the glossary. So when you get all done, it's sort of an algebra or calculus, as far as that's concerned, to the average person. They don't know what it is. And so they never really learn these laws. And yet these laws are just as simple as pie. They're not really complicated. The bodhisattva is someone who decides that he wants to stay here. He's already had attainment. He's won his ascension. He doesn't take it. He stays here, and he tries to help the earth out by anchoring his vibrations into the earth pattern. An ascended being is one who has accepted the gift of the ascension and has probably paid off from 51 to 100% of his karma. Now, do you understand? The choice is yours. I want to make that clear.